Abraham and Sarah lived happily together in the land of Canaan. They were specially happy because in their old age, God had enabled them to have a child. They had longed and prayed for a child for many years, and God had promised them that one day their prayers would be answered. Their child would be the beginning of a great family and nation. Now they had their son, called Isaac, and he brought them much joy. When Sarah was 127 years old, she died. One of the things that helped Abraham get over Sarah's death was his love for his son Isaac, and Isaac's love for him. The father and son took care of each other. Abraham watched Isaac grow into a young man, tall, straight, and clever. He knew it was time for Isaac to have a wife. Abraham wanted Isaac to have as good a wife as Sarah had been for him. She must be a kind woman who would love Isaac and help him to follow God. Abraham called his servant one day and gave him a mission. "I want you to find a wife for Isaac. Go back to my people and choose a woman from them." The servant loaded up several camels with jewels, silk, and gifts, which he could give to the woman he might find. It was a nearly impossible mission. There were so many women. How would he know the right one? What if she didn't want to come back with him? Abraham had said, "An angel will arrive there before you and make sure you're in the right place at the right time." The servant thought about this and prayed to Abraham's God throughout the journey. Finally, he arrived at a well in the land where Abraham's family lived. He prayed, "O Lord of my master Abraham, you choose the woman you know is right for Isaac. Show me clearly who she is. If I ask her for some water, and she says, 'Drink, and I'll give your camels a drink too,' then I will know that she is the one." The servant sat down by the well and waited. Soon he saw a group of young women coming towards him. Each had a water jar on her shoulder. One was a very beautiful young girl. The servant said a prayer, then went to her. "Please, give me a little water from your jar," he asked. This was the test. What would she answer? "Drink, my lord, and I'll give your camels a drink too." The servant was very excited and watched her while she got their drinks. He asked her what family she came from. She named her family, and it was the same as Abraham's. The servant knew then that this lovely young woman was the one God meant to become Isaac's wife. His mission had not been so impossible after all, since it had been arranged by God. The servant gave the girl 2 large gold bracelets, then thanked God for leading him to Abraham's relatives. When the girl heard the servant's prayer, she picked up her skirts and ran home as fast as she could. "Mother! Father!" she called out breathlessly. "There is a man by the well, and he has come from very far away. He says he works for our long-lost uncle Abraham. And look!" She held out her arms. "He gave me these bracelets." The girl's name was Rebecca. When her brother Laban saw the bracelets, he knew a very important man must have sent the servant. He ran out to the well and invited the servant to come and stay with them. The servant told them that Abraham had become a rich man living in Canaan. Then he told them about Isaac, the special son for whom Abraham and Sarah had waited so long. He told them about his prayers, that God would lead him to just the right woman. When Rebecca's family heard this, they shook their heads in amazement. Surely God was very great to make it all happen at just the right time and place. The servant asked them, Will you allow Rebekah to come with me and marry Isaac? Her family said, Well, this is from the Lord. Here is Rebekah. Take her and go, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard this, he bowed down to the ground and thanked God again. He wanted to leave right away. He was so excited. He couldn't wait to see the look on Isaac's face when he saw Rebekah. Rebekah's family called her and asked, Will you go with this man? I will go, she said. Rebekah had never met Isaac. She didn't know anything about him, except that he worshipped the Lord. She also knew that the Lord had led Abraham's servant to her. The next day, Rebekah and her maids climbed on their camels and started the journey back, taking the way the servant had come. After many days, they finally came within sight of Abraham's tents. On the day they arrived, Isaac was working in the fields. It was hot, and he'd been working hard, sweating in the sun. He looked up and saw camels coming towards him. Who is that beautiful woman there? He wondered. He walked towards the camels. At the same time, Rebekah looked towards Isaac. There is Isaac, said Abraham's servant. She quickly covered her face with her veil. Soon Rebekah and Isaac were married. Isaac loved Rebekah very much, and her love for him made Isaac feel better after his mother's death. God had known just the right person to care for Isaac, and just the right person to care for Rebekah. Abraham's heart was warm with joy when he saw how much Isaac loved Rebekah. He felt it was time for Isaac to take over as head of the family. Now I can die, he thought. After a long life, which had lasted 175 years, Abraham died. Isaac buried him next to Sarah. As the years went by, Isaac learned to listen to God's voice. He learned to trust in what God said. Year followed year, without much change, except that Isaac owned more land, more sheep, cattle, and camels. He became a rich man. But there was one thing that he lacked, and that was a child. Rebekah and Isaac, just like Sarah and Abraham, did not have any children in the first years of their marriage. They had plenty to eat, many servants, and a good land to live in, but no children. Nonetheless, they trusted the Lord to provide the family he'd promised them. So they waited. Isaac and Rebekah tried to obey God in whatever they did. They asked God's help whenever they made decisions about where to live, how to judge right from wrong, and forgiving people who did wrong. With God's help, they lived good lives. But as the years went by, they still didn't have a little girl or boy. Rebekah and Isaac waited and waited. Finally, Isaac prayed to God, asking him to make it possible for Rebekah to have a baby. A short time later, God answered Isaac's prayer, but not in the way they expected. There was not one baby growing inside Rebekah, but two. She was expecting twins. The babies got bigger and bigger. When it was almost time for them to be born, Rebekah could often feel their little feet pushing against her. Isaac liked to put his hand on her and feel the babies moving inside. One night, Rebekah woke up suddenly. The babies had been kicking and hitting each other so hard she hurt inside. She prayed to God. Lord, what is happening? Are my babies all right? If I hurt when they push and shove, they must hurt too. Why is this happening? God answered her. "The 2 boys you carry will one day be fathers of whole nations. One people will be stronger than the other, and the elder son will do what the younger tells him." The time finally came for Rebecca to have her babies. The eldest, the first one to be born, was red, and the whole of his body was covered with hair. He was called Esau, which means hairy. His brother followed him, his tiny hand holding on to Esau's foot. Because of this, his parents named him Jacob, which means he grabs the heel. Many years passed, and the boys grew up. They were good at doing different things. Jacob was quiet, often helping at home and talking to his parents. Esau would hunt and catch wild animals. His favorite food was meat from wild animals, and he was glad that Esau could hunt so well. One day, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came back from hunting. He was very hungry because he hadn't eaten all day. "Quick, give me some of that stew," he said to Jacob. "I'm so hungry I could die." He sat down on the other side of the fire from Jacob and could hardly wait for Jacob to pour the stew into a bowl. He could have scooped the stew out of the pot with his own 2 hands. He was so hungry. Jacob listened to his elder brother talk about how hungry he was, and he thought of a plan. Jacob knew he had everything he needed. His parents loved him, he had plenty to eat, and he was healthy. Yet there was one more thing Jacob wanted, and that was Esau's birthright. Because Esau was the eldest, Esau had a right to receive all of Isaac's property when Isaac died, just as Isaac had received these things from Abraham when Abraham died. This right was called Esau's birthright. Jacob didn't like this. He wanted to be the elder. He wanted it so much he got angry. "Why does hairy Esau have to be the eldest?" he asked. So Jacob made a deal with Esau. "If you're really hungry," Jacob said, "then give me your birthright, and I'll give you some stew." Esau hardly heard what his brother was mumbling about. Esau was so hungry he thought his stomach had shriveled up and died. He didn't care what he had to do. He wanted food. "Yes, all right, whatever you say. Now give me some stew, now." "Swear to it first," Jacob said. So Esau swore an oath to him, giving his birthright to Jacob. Jacob gave Esau his bread and stew in return for the birthright. When Esau had finished eating, he got up and left. That was all Esau cared about his rights as the firstborn son. As the 2 brothers grew older, Jacob became Rebekah's favorite son. She loved Esau, but for Jacob she wanted only the very best. When Isaac grew into an old man, he could no longer see and spent most of his time in bed. One day, Isaac called Esau to him. "My son, because you are the eldest, I want to give you my blessing. First, though, go out hunting and cook some tasty meat for me. Then I will give you my blessing." Rebekah had overheard what Isaac said to Esau. After Esau left, she called Jacob and said, "Your father is about to give Esau his blessing. I want you to have it. Go and kill 2 of our best goats. I will cook them in just the way Isaac likes his meat. Then you can bring it in to him, and you will get his blessing instead." When the food was ready, Rebekah covered Jacob's neck, arms and hands with goat skin, so that his skin would feel like Esau's hairy skin. Jacob went into his father's room. "That was quick, my son," Isaac said. "Yes, father." "But you sound like Jacob." "Come here," Isaac said. Jacob went to the bedside of his blind father. Isaac ran his hands over Jacob and felt the hair of the goat skin. "You feel like Esau, though," he said. Then Isaac tasted the food Jacob gave him. "Ah," he said. There was one last test, though. "Come here and kiss me, my son," Isaac said. Rebekah had dressed Jacob in Esau's clothes. When Jacob bent over Isaac and Isaac smelt him, Isaac said, "Ah, you smell like the fields where you've been hunting. You are indeed Esau. Here, then, is your blessing." A blessing was a very special thing. Isaac knew God was listening when he asked God to make his son rich. He prayed that other people, including his brother, would serve this son. He asked God to bless all the people who were good to his son, and curse those who were not good to him. When Isaac had finished praying, Jacob left the room. A little later, Esau returned from his hunting trip. He rushed into his father's room with the food he had prepared. But Isaac said, "Why have you come back a second time?" "This is my first time," Esau said. Isaac sighed. "That must have been Jacob then. Esau, your brother, has stolen your blessing." Esau was very angry. "Haven't you saved a blessing for me?" he cried. All Isaac could say was that Esau would have to serve Jacob. Esau would be a fighter, but one day he would be free from his brother who had cheated him. This wasn't what Esau wanted to hear. He stamped out of his father's bedroom, too angry to think straight. Esau could not believe his brother had cheated him a second time. First, Jacob had taken his birthright, all the riches he would have inherited when Isaac died. Then Jacob had stolen his blessing, God's protection for the future. Esau was so angry, he decided to kill his brother. Rebekah found out about Esau's plan and warned Jacob. "You will have to go and live with my brother Laban. His home is very far away, but if you stay there, Esau may forget how angry he is with you," she said. There was nothing Isaac could do about Jacob and Esau. Jacob was the one with God's blessing, and Isaac couldn't take it back. So he called Jacob to him and taught him about God's promises to Abraham for their family. Isaac said that one day God would let them settle in this beautiful land of Canaan and make them into a great people with many children, as many as the stars in the sky. "But you cannot marry any of the women from around here," Isaac told him. "Go back to your mother's family and marry one of Laban's daughters. Then bring her here, and may God bless you and your family." Jacob listened to his parents' advice. He packed his things, quickly said goodbye, then started his journey. By the time Esau heard about it, Jacob had been gone a long time. He knew it was useless to try and follow, So Esau stayed with his parents, taking care of them in their old age. He kept the family strong until Jacob returned. Jacob's journey would be a long one. He was running away from Esau and very much afraid that Esau might try to catch up with him. Jacob was more than a little nervous about the trip. He hoped he would have enough food and water. On his first night alone, Jacob had a strange dream. Jacob saw a ladder rise up high into the sky. Angels climbed the ladder, going up and down. And at the very top stood the Lord. God said, "I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and of your father Isaac. I will give you and all your children the very land where you sleep now. There will be so many in your family, it will number more than all the little specks of dust on the earth. Everyone on earth will be blessed because of you and your family. I am with you and will take care of you wherever you go. I will make sure you come back to this land." When Jacob woke up, he was amazed by his dream. It had been so real. God was right there, just above him. Jacob looked up, but saw only an endless number of stars stretching from horizon to horizon. This must be a very special place. The Lord is here, he thought to himself. Jacob called the place Bethel, which means house of God. After many days of traveling, Jacob arrived at a well where shepherds often brought their sheep to drink. A huge stone lay over the well. When Jacob asked the shepherds if they'd ever heard of Laban, they said that they had. They pointed to a young woman who was leading her sheep towards them. "Look," said the shepherds, "that girl is Rachel. She is Laban's daughter." Jacob could hardly believe his ears. He knew his long journey must be almost over. Then he asked the shepherds why they didn't roll back the stone so that the sheep could drink. "Oh, it's too heavy. We always wait until all the shepherds are here, so we can do it together," they said. So Jacob picked up the heavy stone all by himself. With a mighty heave, he pushed it off. Then he turned to Rachel, who'd been watching him. He was so relieved to see a member of the family for whom he'd walked so very far, he kissed her. "I am Jacob, your cousin," he said. Rachel ran back to her father and told him all that had happened. Laban went out to the well and hugged Jacob, welcoming him. When Laban brought him home, the whole family hugged, kissed, and cried tears of joy. Everyone was so happy to see the son of Rebekah, who had left so many, many years ago. Jacob told Laban about his parents and what had happened during the many years since Rebekah had left her home as a young girl. "So, my father said I must come here to find a wife, because the people near us do not worship the one true God," Jacob said. Laban nodded, but he was not paying much attention. Laban was greedy and selfish. He had 2 daughters, and Jacob was looking for a wife. "All right, Jacob," Laban said. "We would love to have you stay with us. If you work for us, though, surely there is something you want in return." "Oh, yes, Uncle," said Jacob. He looked across the room at Rachel. She was very beautiful. She looked at Jacob, then looked down, and Jacob knew he had found his bride. Already he felt his love for Rachel growing. "Yes, Uncle, I want to marry Rachel, and I will work 7 years for you as payment." "I would rather give her to you than anyone else. Do stay here and work for me then," Laban agreed. Laban was thinking of an evil plan. While Rachel was lovely to look at, her older sister Leah was not. Laban rubbed his hands together. He knew a way to trick Jacob. Jacob worked hard for 7 years. Every morning, he watched the lovely Rachel walk towards the pastures with her sheep. When she waved at him, his heart soared to the hills with her. He hardly noticed the 7 years go by, he was so much in love. "Rachel, my Rachel," he sang to himself as he worked in the fields. When the time was up, Jacob went to Laban and said, "I have worked for you for 7 years. Now I want to marry Rachel." But Laban was cunning. The time had come for him to play his trick on Jacob. On the wedding night it was dark, and the bride was wrapped in veils. It wasn't until the morning after the wedding that Jacob saw who lay in bed next to him. It was not the beautiful Rachel. No, it was Leah. "Laban, you tricked me!" Jacob stormed into Laban's tent. As he said the words, he remembered how he too had once tricked his brother Esau. He had tricked Esau out of both his birthright and blessing. Now he knew what it felt like to be tricked. Jacob did not think it felt very good. "Laban, give me Rachel," he demanded. "Now calm down, Laban said. "It's not our custom to let the younger daughter marry before the elder. You will marry Rachel. But since you've already had Leah as your wife, you must work another 7 years as payment for Rachel," Laban said. The next week, Jacob finally married Rachel. But this meant he had to work yet another 7 years for Laban. The second 7 years, during which Jacob worked for Laban, seemed to last forever. But God had not forgotten Jacob, and he blessed everything Jacob did, giving him many children. But all the children belonged to Leah. While she had 7 children, Rachel had none. For a long time she prayed to God, over and over again. Then, finally, Rachel did have a son. She named him Joseph. The day came when little Joseph's father, Jacob, told Laban, "I have worked long and hard for you. Now let me go back to my own family." "Oh no," thought Laban. "I need Jacob. He's far too good a worker for me to lose." Laban said, "Name your wage, Jacob. Stay with me and I will pay you whatever you want." Jacob asked God what he should do. God told him to ask for all the dark, speckled, striped or spotted sheep and goats in Laban's flock. Jacob did so, and Laban agreed. More years went by, and God blessed Jacob's sheep and goats. They became stronger and more plentiful than Laban's, and Laban became jealous. Jacob knew that his uncle Laban didn't like him anymore, and he was tired of working for him. So for the second time, Jacob decided it was time to go home. 20 years had passed since he had left home, and he wanted to see his parents again. Jacob told his wives to organize the children, all the sheep and goats that were his, the servants and tents. They loaded the camels and left, without telling Laban. When Laban heard that Jacob was gone, he became very angry. He chased after Jacob for 7 days. "What have you done, stealing my daughters and grandchildren?" he yelled at Jacob when he finally caught up with him. "Laban, I have worked for you for many years. Surely I've earned the right to go home. Now let us make peace and promise never to harm each other." After some discussion, Laban agreed. Then he kissed Leah and Rachel and all his grandchildren and went back home. Jacob started the long journey back to Isaac and Rebekah, not knowing what home would be like after so many years. He was a rich man, but he still felt uneasy about the way he had cheated Esau. He wondered how his brother felt about him. As Jacob came closer to home, he felt more and more nervous about Esau. Would his brother still be angry? Just to be on the safe side, Jacob sent messengers to Esau. They were to tell Esau that Jacob was very rich, that he was finally coming home, and that he wanted to be friends. When the messengers returned, they said that Esau was coming to meet Jacob, bringing 400 men with him. "Oh no," thought Jacob. "Esau is coming to destroy me." "Lord," he prayed, "you have been so very good to me. I left home with nothing, but now I return with more than I know what to do with. Please save me from Esau. Let no harm come to these mothers and children." He felt very small that night before Esau arrived. It was to become a night full of surprises, though. A night Jacob would never forget. As Jacob stood alone under the stars, worrying and praying, a man came from out of the desert. It was dark, and Jacob could not see who the man was. It wasn't Esau. Whoever it was, the man was very strong, and he wrestled with Jacob. All night long the two grabbed and grappled, rolling in the sand, over and over again, panting and heaving. But neither seemed to win. They were of equal strength. Then the stranger struck Jacob on the hip, putting it out of joint. The stranger said, "Let me go. It will soon be sunrise." Then Jacob knew who he was. "This is no ordinary man," Jacob thought. "It is either an angel, or could it be? It is the Lord God himself." "I won't let you go unless you bless me," said Jacob. "What is your name?" the stranger asked. "Jacob." "No, you are no longer Jacob. Your new name is Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have won," the stranger said. "And what is your name, please?" Jacob said. "Why do you want to know?" the stranger said. Then he blessed Jacob, as Jacob lay panting in the desert dust, and the sun started its climb over the horizon. Suddenly, the stranger was gone, and Jacob knew he had seen God face to face. He knew he was lucky still to be alive. Jacob limped back to camp. Before he arrived, he saw a crowd of men coming towards him. When Jacob saw the crowd, he called Rachel and Leah and all his children. He lined them up, with Rachel and Joseph coming last. Then he went to the head of the line and limped out to meet Esau. He limped because he still hurt from wrestling with the Lord. When he met Esau, Jacob bowed down to the ground 7 times. Although he was afraid, Jacob was excited and pleased to see his elder brother again. He prayed that Esau would forgive him. Jacob's prayers were answered. For when Esau saw Jacob, he jumped off his camel, gathered up his robes, and ran straight for Jacob. Esau's 400 men watched, and Jacob's wives and children watched. The 2 men hugged each other and cried and hugged each other again. They were so glad to be back together. All was forgiven. What mattered was that they were brothers, and the long years apart were finally over. Then Esau looked up and saw Leah and Rachel and their children. "Who are all these people?" he asked. "The Lord has blessed me very much during these last years," Jacob said. "This is my family, and all these animals and servants are mine as well. Please, take some of my donkeys, camels, sheep, and goats as a gift." "No, you don't need to do that," Esau said. "Please, Esau, they're the very least I can give you. Let me do this. It would be my joy." Finally, Esau said that he would take Jacob's gifts. He invited Jacob to travel with him. But Jacob said that because of the babies and young animals, he had to travel slowly. "Go on ahead, Esau, and we will meet you later," Jacob said. So Esau went on ahead. Jacob thanked God for the peace between him and Esau. The night after Esau had left, when Jacob prayed to God, God said, "Go to the place where I first talked to you, to Bethel, where you had the dream about the ladder reaching up to heaven." Jacob loaded the tents onto the camels. His sons herded the sheep, goats, donkeys, and cattle, and they all headed for Bethel. When Jacob arrived there, God appeared to him again. "Your name is Jacob, but now you have a new name, Israel. Many of your sons and the sons of your sons will be kings. You are my chosen people," God said. When he had finished praying, Jacob told his family that they must never worship other gods. The tribes and people around them worshipped stones and statues, the sun and the wind, instead of God. Jacob told his family to pack up for the last time. They were only a few days away from seeing his parents, Isaac and Rebekah. When he gave the order to pack, though, he made sure Rachel did not have to lift anything. She was going to have her second baby, and he wanted to take good care of her. Soon little Joseph would have a baby brother or sister. When they were on their way, Rachel felt the baby coming. She wanted this second baby very much. She sweated and strained. After a long time, she heard someone say, "You have a boy." But it was the last thing she heard. For soon afterwards, beautiful Rachel, the love of Jacob's heart, died. Jacob cried and cried. He had lost his best friend. He held the tiny baby in his arms, and his tears fell on the soft blanket. Jacob called Rachel's second son Benjamin, which means son who will be fortunate. Many days later, Jacob arrived back at his old home. His parents had grown very old and knew they would soon die. They had waited and waited for their son to return. When Jacob arrived, Esau was already there. The family was so happy to be together again. They had a lot to tell one another about the many years they had spent apart. Isaac lived to be 180 years old. When he died, Esau and Jacob were with him. Together they buried him and comforted the family. Then Esau said farewell to Jacob. The two brothers hugged each other, friends at last, and went their separate ways. The promise which God had made to Esau's mother, Rebekah, when she was pregnant, had finally come true. Esau no longer served his younger brother. He had made a life of his own.